place on, I read you the letter yesterday of Shavua 17, what year was that? 1798, which led to the arrest, the incarceration of the Alter Rebbe. Perhaps over the coming days we could tell some stories that happened during that time. And we're going to fast forward a little bit to what the relevant date, that is next week, Yud Tes Kislev, when in 1798, after weeks of imprisonment, what happened finally, after all the investigations and interrogations, the Tsar ordered the immediate release of the Alter Rebbe and any of the Hasidim who were incarcerated with him, or not necessarily directly with him, but at the same time as him. And of course, since then, this day, Yud Tes Kislev, has become a tremendous holiday on the Hasidic calendar. It is called the Rosh Hashanah of Hasidus, the Hasidic New Year, and it's celebrated immensely in Hasidic circles. I was in Israel one year for Yud Tes, actually twice for Yud Tes Kislev. It's an incredible experience being there, being in New York, or being when the Rebbe, when I was a child, we would sometimes go to the Rebbe's Farbrengens and Yud Tes Kislev, and it was always a very special experience to be there. So I want to now go back into analyzing the story of what happened. Because after the Alter Rebbe was released from jail, and on that note, allegedly, we're going to see some 50-something captives today, I believe. Yes, I'm very happy for the captives release. I'm not so happy for those who were murdered by the terrorists who are being released. When the world talks about disproportionality, I wonder where their morality is now, disproportionality, where Israel releases 3 terrorists per captive. Anyways, not to digress, it's a different kind of story, because this is a civil story, the arrest and liberation of the Alter Rebbe, whereas that is a terror story, the one that we're dealing with at the moment. But I'm sure we can find and draw some parallels, which I'm open to and love to hear your insights, your ideas, your comments. I want to read a letter just to put things into perspective. This letter is specifically related to the story of the Alter Rebbe. I would not in any way, shape, or form relate it to the current situation. It's a world apart, okay? So there's no parallel, there's no correlation in my mind of this letter to the current story. But let's go back to yesterday's discussion. Who penned the letter of libel against the Alter Rebbe? Are we hot? We want the air conditioner on. Who's got the remote? Usually Malcolm has it. Where's Malcolm? I saw him here before. Saw him earlier. Hirsch. Oh yes, David Ben Hirsch. But my point is, yes, this came from inside. This came from Jews espousing hate against the holy person, the Alter Rebbe. How would you expect the Alter Rebbe to react? We're going to read it right here. This is the letter in which he reacts and tells us Hasidim how they are to react, how they are to respond to this. And it's fascinating. So let's read the response and, think about this. This is a man who was in jail for almost 2 months under libelous claims. What 2 months? Yeah, nearly 2 months. And yet he takes a very conciliatory response. I guess lahavdil, in a sense, like Nelson Mandela, who, had he not done so, we could have seen carnage and bloodshed here in South Africa. And the Alter Rebbe is taking a moral high ground in his response as well. And therefore, he writes this Hasidim. It is well known that the sin of divisiveness and baseless hatred is very severe. So he's got some powerful words here, that this is something that is very, very important that we pay attention to. It's therefore fitting for all upstanding and God-fearing people to be cautious to an extreme degree, not to cause even indirectly any detriment in this regard. He doesn't want this tit-for-tat, retaliation, retribution, revenge, none of that. If anybody wants to sort the air conditioner, maybe you could ask Sharon or find Temba, or maybe the remote might be on the Bima there, or Vusi might know. So if somebody wants to do that, you could volunteer to ask them and they'll sort it out. The Alter Rebbe continues, next paragraph. It is difficult to pen a letter, a true and deep feeling of my heart, which is to awaken in the hearts of our community a love for all Yidden, even to those who are not inclined to help us, because this is part of the mitzvah of Avas Yisrael, to love all Jewish people. Despite fellow Jews harming him, he says we're not going to perpetuate this baribble further, and it will just inflict and cause greater harm. It was for this reason that last year, after the passing of the pious Gaon of Vilna, may his memory be for a blessing, I wrote a stern warning to all members of our community not to utter even a trace of negative speech about this Torah scholar in the wake of his passing, with no exceptions. So he's making it very clear that they should not speak negatively about the people who caused them this trouble, including their leader, the Vilna Gaon. But now, because of the distressing times that we have just experienced, I'm concerned that some may think that this prohibition has been lifted. God forbid, given that the perpetrators of our suffering relied on the late pious great sage, may his memory be for a blessing, and the Alter Rebbe continues to invoke his memory for a blessing. So we see over and over that he's saying his memory for a blessing, and he says even though he's passed away, we're still not going to, and all the more so, not going to blame him for this behavior. Therefore, I've come to warn anyone once again, whether they reside near or far, with a double and redoubled warning. Do not permit yourself to open your mouth and tongue against the honor of the Torah, the honorable and righteous Gaon of blessed memory. For it is known to us with certainty that this opposition did not originate with him, God forbid, and that he did not advocate aggressive measures against us. Indeed, such an error did not come from the master for as long as he lived. So the Alter Rebbe is emphasizing over and over not to blame the Vilna Gaon for the animosity, for the friction that was happening between the Hasidim and those who were Hasidically challenged, the Misnagdim of the time. Additionally, read his words here, what he says. We're holding the middle paragraph. I demand and request of you all to accustom your hearts to love every Jew and to judge them favorably, even those who do not support us. For the real truth is that all Jews are literally like siblings, and about us all it's written, Bani Matem Hashem, you are children of God. This is in Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy, towards the end of Moshe's life. He reminds the Jewish people that, and the Talmud teaches that we are called God's children regardless of our behavior. Thus, God is surely saddened and grieved when we harbor hatred in our hearts towards those who oppose us. Last paragraph, bottom of the slide. Therefore, one whose heart is touched with the awe of heaven must fulfill that which is written. Do not harbor evil in your hearts against another. And then as water reflects the image of the face looking into it, so will the jealousy and rivalry dissipate from their hearts. So the Alter Rebbe is saying that if we love them, that love will be reciprocal, and we will put an end to this vicious cycle of animosity and hatred. And what's unique about this class versus the class we did before, we were talking previously about outside hatred. But I think a greater threat to the Jewish people is the trouble from within. This was a typical such case. But let's just analyze this and take some lessons from, we just read this fairly long letter, which is from Igrot Kodesh, the letters of the Alter Rebbe. Let's now just unpack it for a moment. And there's two important pieces of information that emerge from this letter. First of all, we got to remember, despite the libelous testimony against the Alter Rebbe that caused his imprisonment in St. Petersburg for 50-something days, and that now he was finally released, and what oftentimes happens when somebody is released from, where you are vindicated. What do we like to do when we're vindicated? How do we like to prove ourselves to our accuser? I was talking with somebody yesterday who has had a dispute with a neighbor, and the neighbor won a particular case. And he was telling me, I have so many ways I could get back at him. And he said, the hardest thing for me to do right now is to hold back and not do it. So I said, well, why don't you? I asked him. He said, I have nothing to gain from hurting my neighbor. He had nothing to gain from hurting me, but he hurt me anyways. But I have nothing to gain from hurting him back, other than just inflicting a continued animosity, hatred, fighting. And he said he's choosing not to do it. And I said, Kol hakavod, hats off to you. So let's analyze this. The Vilna Gaon, okay? The Alter Rebbe talks about him. What's his connection to the story? He was a great genius. He was a leader of his time. He was a towering, great Talmud Chacham, a Jewish scholar in his era, in his when he lived. And while I don't know what official position he held, but he was certainly a genius in all fields of Torah, including the Kabbalistic mystical aspects of Torah, the inner dimension, which we're going to get to because that was a major part of the debate. So the Gra, that's another name for the Vilna Gaon. Gaon, Rabbi Eliyahu, Gra. It's an acronym, okay? He opposed the Hasidic movement. Now, why did he oppose it? We can understand. Before I get into, we're gonna get into some deeper stuff just now. Might not be today, but it's part of my curriculum. There was a theological and philosophical difference between the way the Vilna Gaon saw and understood the Torah from the way the Hasidic teachings were. Shammai and Hillel were two great sages, both quoted in the Talmud. And sometimes the law follows Shammai, sometimes the law follows Hillel. They had differing opinions. He had a difference of opinion in how he understood certain mystical and theological ideas. Pardon? Hillel and Shammai. And I'm correlating it now to 200 years ago, the Vilna Gaon versus the Hasidic movement. But there was more to it. You have to understand, after a time when Jews experienced a false Messiah in the form of Shabtai Tzvi, you could understand the suspicion of a new movement starting where the people revere the rabbi to such a great degree. So, and you could still hear it today, where people say, the irony is the hypocrisy I hear in this, where people say, why do Chabadniks have so many pictures of the Rebbe? And I look at them and say, why do you have pictures of your favorite sports heroes or actors or celebrities? Because you revere this person, you honor them. Not only is an honor, you aspire to live by the inspiration that motivates you. Yes, Rav Moshe. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's right. Exactly. Good. So, and we see this in other movements as well today. I won't go into all the details of it, but we see that all over. When people say, how could Lubavitchers pray at the Rebbe's gravesite? You mean to tell me that we only pray at the Rebbe's gravesite? Does nobody pray in Hebron at Marat HaMachpelah? Does nobody pray at Kever Rachel? Does nobody pray at the Arizal's Kever? At so many other Kvarim, holy resting places? Of course. Yes, Mary. Yeah. Exactly. 100%. And if the Rebbe is, anyways, I don't want to digress because, and by the way, on that note, I'm going to make a plug for something now. In about 6 months' time will be the 30th yahrzeit of the Rebbe. It's amazing. It's shocking how time flies because it was just before my bar mitzvah, and I remember it like yesterday, the day the Rebbe passed away. I was present. I remember the sirens blaring and going and rushing. Anyway, so to honor that, in the new year, when we resume in January, we're going to launch a new course looking at dissecting. I'm going to take different aspects of the Rebbe's advice for life. That's my plan, please God. And we'll just look at different things. Now, I'm talking about life, from old age to business, to financial struggles, to shidduchim, to any idea. And of course, you might say, well, at 97 years old or at 64 or whatever it is, you might not be looking for a shidduch, but maybe your grandchild is, maybe someone else you know is. So I think all these areas are relevant. And while we're going to look at it from the Torah angle, we'll look at it with a unique paradigm and perspective of the Rebbe. Okay. To order meaningful life, well, that will be part of it. We're going to look at a few sources and put it together as an interesting course that will take us through some time, and then we'll have to get ready for Purim, and then get ready for Pesach, and Tu B'Shvat. We'll take breaks in between for different celebrations, but that will be like the theme. Now, the thing is, it's not going to be the same topic every day. Every day we'll take another topic, or two or three. And in fact, you're welcome to give me topics, and I'll research them and include them into the course. So you give me ideas, and of course, as always, we'll always have PowerPoint slides and interesting things to keep it interesting and interactive. And something else I want to encourage. Oh, I guess we got Jill. You're doing that, taking notes. So maybe what I should start doing is providing with notepads. What happened to the pearls? I don't see the pearls out anymore. While I was away, the pearls stopped coming out. There's one. Okay, no worries. What's that? Okay. All right, we're back. So over the next 3 weeks, let's chap around. Remember, 3 weeks from today is the Hanukkah party. So we still got about half hour left for today's discussion. Let's analyze this letter that we just read from the Alter Rebbe, where he's telling us that the Gra's opposition of the Hasidim, which the Alter Rebbe, I guess, was sensitive to and understood. And he said, because the Gra actually signed a cherem, an actual ban against the Hasidic movement. We're going to get to that. In 1797, the Gra passed away. And this letter that we just read was written a year later, after the Gra passed, okay? The Gra is an acronym for Gaon Rabbi Eliyahu, also known as the Vilna Gaon, okay? So the Alter Rebbe informs us immediately after the Gra's passing, and he wrote this letter to his Hasidim, not to seize that as opportunity to take revenge, because he's saying the Gra was not at fault for the opposition. And more so, he emphasized that the commandment of Avas Yisrael, to love your fellow Jew, is that we're all spiritual siblings, so to say. You know, the story, I was discussing this with my kids the other day. I said, it's one of the commandments in the Torah. You have to honor your father and mother, and whether you like it or not, I'm your father and mother, you gotta like it, you gotta honor us. Okay. My kids, and now your big brother. I know sometimes you guys get into tiffs. Maybe you can tell me which commandment says you have to honor and respect him too. And one of my kids said, "Oh, it's that one there. It says, thou shalt not murder." We have to remember we're all spiritual siblings. And we have to try to get that back into perspective. And once we could realign ourselves and realize we're all one family, then hopefully sometimes families fight. There's no faribel like a family faribel, huh? Unfortunately, in my years of the rabbi, some really bad ones where I've had to intervene, or sometimes I've had to do 2 unveilings or separate Shiva homes, shreklach. Here, we're talking about the Alter Rebbe, and after his arrest, and after the liberation, the Alter Rebbe was very concerned that his followers, the Hasidim, might think that they could, for the honor of their Rebbe, they could exact revenge and do what they need to hold those people to account for their libelous gossip and slander against the Alter Rebbe, because the allegations and accusations against him, they took things like when he was sending money to Israel to support the impoverished Jews in the Holy Land. They said, you see, this rabbi is a traitor, it's treasonous, sending money to a foreign country that's at war with Russia. So they took a little truth and turned it into something that they thought they could create a case against him, which ultimately he was vindicated. The allegations were proven wrong and the case was dismissed, but it took time for that to happen. So the first thing the Alter Rebbe makes clear is that don't blame it on the leader of the Hasidically challenged movement, the Vilna Gaon. He said it was no coincidence that the treasonous charges, the allegations that were registered with the Tsar only after the Gra's passing, because the Gra said the Alter Rebbe would never, ever have approved, would never have allowed such measures to be taken against the Hasidim. Complete slander, to have the Alter Rebbe arrested, that's not something that would be endorsed by the Vilna Gaon. And it was unscrupulous actors who the Alter Rebbe put the blame on that were responsible for this persecution. And although they justified their behavior by referencing the Vilna Gaon's opposition to the Hasidim, but their tactics, the way they did it, was something that he would never have supported. Oh, so first of all, he didn't. That's the point Alter Rebbe is making. He never approved these tactics. The fact is, he disapproved the Hasidic movement, which the Alter Rebbe will go on to say, had he had a chance to meet, there were people who prevented the meeting of him and the Alter Rebbe. Had he had a chance to meet, he would have become a Chassid himself. Because while he thought that the Hasidic teachings were heretical, had he met the Alter Rebbe, he would see it was far from heresy, and he would have become a Chassid himself. That's what the Alter Rebbe felt. But there were unscrupulous actors. There were people who prevented such a meeting from happening. But no doubt, despite his opposition, it wasn't against the people. It was maybe against the philosophy and some of the teachings that he had a different perspective on. But he would never have approved those tactics of the libelous allegations, the slander that caused Alter Rebbe's arrest. Sure. Right. Yeah. He inspired the simple. Relax, Clive. This is for everyone to participate. It's for everyone. Don't worry. It's a valid question. Okay, so look, that was the beginning. Okay, Miriam wants to interject or answer. No, we don't want to stir it up, but go ahead. That's why I put that next slide up for you. No, go ahead. Well, all beginnings are challenging and difficult, and there's always this suspicion, and that maybe that's what led to that derision. But either way, this was the beginning. Now, I want to share with you actually a little interesting insight from a Farbrengen. And the insight from the Farbrengen was one of the great Hasidim. I think it was Reb Isaac Hamler and Hillel Paritcher. These are great Hasidim from the mid 1800s. They were sitting at a Farbrengen, and I don't remember the exact context of it, but basically one of them said, like the Vilna Gaon, we're not talking about some Schmendrick who opposed the Hasidic. He was a genius. He was a great mind. If he opposed the Hasidic movement, then what potential do we have? Like what lies ahead in our future? And especially, he says, today, which was a good 50-something years after the Vilna Gaon had passed, and there was still opposition, and other great rabbis who opposed the Hasidic movement still. So one of the rabbis who was participating responded. He said, if in earlier generations, the great and the wholesome scholars of that time could err so drastically to oppose the Hasidic movement, then in this generation, when he says the bar of scholarship is certainly not as high as it used to be. He says we're not as intellectually sharp as they once were. Maybe that's debatable. I don't know. There are aspects of today that can make us more intelligent and know a lot more information, but there are aspects of today that we get more distracted with, right? But he says the righteousness, maybe that certainly we can concur with, that because they had less distractions back then, they were probably somewhat more righteous. And he said that how much greater is the sin of those who oppose the Hasidic movement today, because they're not as righteous and wise as the previous sages were. So he sort of turned it on its head and said that it's not exactly, don't see it as, because he was such a great person. I mean, I don't want to make this, again, no comparison, but there are some very great minds and scholars out there today who oppose the existence of Israel. That doesn't make Israel wrong. Lahavdil, just because a very great person, such as the Vilna Gaon, opposed the Hasidic movement, that didn't make the Hasidic movement wrong, which is what we're going to spend time here over the next week, analyzing that before we move into the Hanukkah mode. Yeah. Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Now, the second point the Alter Rebbe emphasizes here is that despite our differences, we're still family. And as family, we have to love each other, we have to care for each other. We still have the mitzvah of Avas Yisrael. So we have 2 points here. Number one is that the Vilna Gaon would never have endorsed or approved of this behavior. And number two, the Alter Rebbe says that despite our differences, we still have to find a way to get along with each other because we are Am Yisrael. Look at what happened in Israel. Did we solve the justice? What were the justice reforms? Did we solve the military conscription? Did we solve these issues? I don't know. But when we were attacked, we came together. We have to be together without having to be attacked. And the Alter Rebbe here insisted that his followers, the Hasidim, develop themselves to the point that they should actually literally feel an emotional love towards those who've caused them and their beloved leader all the suffering. I know it doesn't feel good. It's counterintuitive. Somebody hurts you, you should love them. But he said this isn't just possible. He insisted that it was obligatory because of that spiritual connection between their souls. And he says that's something that's intact and you're still family and you can't neglect, you can't negate, and you can't forget who you are. Don't forget that. For the Alter Rebbe, the teachings of Hasidus wasn't just a philosophy. Remember the story I told you about our Pesach retreat when the chef said, "Are you going to take us to Jerusalem?" And I had no clue what he's talking about. And he goes, "Oh, on the last page of your book, it says next year in Jerusalem." Oh, that's it. It can't be two separate things that we say next year in Jerusalem, but we don't mean it. The Alter Rebbe didn't just preach, love your fellow as yourself. He lived it. And that's the point. That's the way he lived his life. He didn't just teach these teachings. He didn't just preach, he practiced. So most people maybe would say, these people caused me trouble. They're my enemies, and I want to exact retribution and retaliate and get revenge against them. The Alter Rebbe was a Dugma Chaya, a living example to his followers to the extent that he went beyond those pitfalls of our personalities, and he applied the teachings of Judaism into practice. He made it real. And he taught this and encouraged his followers to do the same thing. So when I spoke with this person yesterday who said, I can take revenge. There are so many easy ways I can take revenge that will hurt that person in his pocket and in his this. But what will I gain from doing so? Could you ask yourself that question? And the Alter Rebbe felt, what will happen here? We'll just have a continued fighting. And he was right, because pretty much it came to a conclusion at this point. Maybe the Misnagdim realized what harm they inflicted. And this is something that the Alter Rebbe, it's his approach. If you look at the book of Tanya, in the book of Tanya, the Alter Rebbe emphasizes this. The Tanya is the discipline of Chabad Hasidic philosophy. Some call it the Bible of Hasidus. And this empowers us with this spiritual truth. When you read Tanya, it reminds us that this is the way we have to live our life. What does it mean to have a relationship with God? It's to have a relationship with our family as well. And that's chapter 32. How do you say 32 in Hebrew? No, Lamed Bet. What does Lamed Bet spell? Lev, the heart. That's the heart of Tanya. And this approach is one that demands unconditional love, and that lies at the heart of what Chabad philosophy teaches and advocates. And that's a little bit of a crash course in the history of what led to this story, to this teaching. I saw some interesting quotes. Should have put them on the screen. Sorry. What kills a skunk is the publicity it gives itself. Who said that? Abraham Lincoln. Here's another one. The graveyards are filled with indispensable people. Charles de Gaulle said that. I got one or two more here. Humility is like underwear, essential, but indecent if it shows. Okay, one more here. Who said that? Helen Nielsen. Okay, two more. Do you know what keeps me humble? Mirrors. Phyllis Diller. Final one for now. If I only had a little humility, I would be perfect. Head turner. Okay, so with that in mind, I think we summarized the idea of what Chabad philosophy is about. Despite the challenges, how we ought to try to make the best of every situation and share the love and not to exact retribution, not to retaliate. Doesn't mean you shouldn't stand your ground. The Hasidic movement did not cave, did not cower to the opposition. It stood tall and strong. But that was the approach and the attitude that it went with. Let's fast forward a little bit. I got another story for you. My cousin is a Chabad rabbi in Kharkiv, Ukraine. Heard of Kharkiv, Ukraine? Got to see him at the Kinnos. Anyways, in Kharkiv, they have a Chabad cheder, Jewish school. And as part of the curriculum, for the Jewish studies, they have Jewish teachers. The rabbis, the shluchim, are the teachers of the Jewish studies. But when it comes to the secular studies, for that, the teachers aren't necessarily all Jewish. And they have a history teacher, a woman who is a former communist individual, and she teaches history from the Russian secular perspective. She's teaching history, and she gets to the year that this story happened, 1798. She asks her students what happened in the year 1798. Well, my cousin's son raises his hand and says, 1798, it's the year the Alter Rebbe was released from prison. This whole story, 1798, right? There you go, 1798. Where was our screen before? 1798, right? So the lady says, I'm not teaching religious history here. Don't tell me about Alter Rebbe. That you do in your Jewish studies class. I'm talking here about Russian history. Okay. What happened in 1798? And she goes on to say that the great Russian laureate Alexander Pushkin was born in 1798. Anyone here ever heard of Pushkin? Yeah. Only old timers know Pushkin. I don't know Pushkin, but my father used to read Pushkin. It's Russian poetry. Anyways, okay, Zolzain, Pushkin was born. And the teacher goes on and she's telling the class about history, 1799, 1800. She gets to the year 1811. She asks the class what happened in the year 1811. Again, my cousin's son raises his hand. Teacher says, what do you want to say this time about the Alter Rebbe? He says, no. That's the year Pushkin was bar mitzvah. Okay, Pushkin wasn't Jewish, but nevertheless, I thought it's humorous to continue. Yeah. Yeah, interesting. Very interesting. Well, the Baal Shem Tov taught that the teachings of Hasidus were ready to be revealed as we're approaching the Shabbos of mankind, of the world's existence. If we're now in the year 578384, we're getting very close to Shabbos, right? We light candles 18 minutes before sunset. So we're getting very close to Shabbos. And that's why the dissemination of the teachings of Hasidus were essential and important at this stage. I want to look at a few more points before we conclude today. And one of them is in October of 1800, the Alter Rebbe was arrested again. Okay, so it didn't end. And this time there was another libelous allegation that was brought against him. And he was taken to St. Petersburg for interrogation. But this time it was very, very different. Now the Russian authorities knew him. And they knew he was no longer the threat that he was portrayed to be before his first arrest. In fact, I will tell you something about his first arrest. His first arrest happened on Shmini Atzeret Simchas Torah in 1798. When they came to his house to arrest him, they came with a black wagon. That's the way they used to arrest criminals in Russia. Black wagon would come outside. I don't know if they had blue lights or what, but you ever see over here the prison vehicles? That's what is it, the white bucky with the cage in the back. They have sometimes scarier looking ones. In Russia, it was a black wagon. That was for serious criminals. So the Alter Rebbe had an escape route. He could have jumped out the back window, run through the alleyways. He had a plan of action, how he could have run away. He knew the neighborhood, the turf. But one of his Hasidim was sitting there, Shmuel Munkis. He was known to be somewhat of a comical figure, but also very clever. And the Alter Rebbe asked him, should I escape? So I will, why do I get tongue-tied when I was looking for that word? I could skip the arrest. Anyways, Rav Shmuel Munkis said, listen, if you're truly a Rebbe, then what do you have to be worried about arrest? Everything will work out. And if you're not a Rebbe, then you deserve to be arrested. How dare you take away the Olam Haba, the Olam Hazeh, the enjoyment of life in this world from so many people. So the Alter Rebbe listened to his advice and got arrested. And of course, by this time, the authorities had already known the Alter Rebbe. He was a known figure to them, and they respected him. And when he was arrested again in 1800, 2 years later, he was treated respectfully, with dignity throughout the whole process. He was even visited by many ministers, and they say even the Tsar visited him in his prison cell. And not only that, today, if you go to the St. Petersburg Peter Paul, I don't know what they call that prison, fortress, you will see a bust of the Alter Rebbe, of his face, of the famous prisoners who were held in that prison. But he was also given a medal, an honor, and that his family was honored by the Tsarist army by the Tsarist regime, in recognition, realizing that he wasn't the person he was portrayed to be by the opponents of the Hasidic movement, but they had tremendous respect for him. And so, again, of course, he was acquitted of the charges, but that was a whole different story. We won't get into that today about those details. But eventually, the Alter Rebbe did live to see when that animosity, the hatred, the friction, the faribbles, the fights between the communities had eventually subsided. And in the summer of 1811, 2 years before he passed away, the Alter Rebbe passed away on the 24th of Teves in 1813. The Alter Rebbe wrote a very interesting letter. Let's read it. Oh, sorry, guys. The letter looks like I didn't put it in here properly. Okay, I'll read the letter to you. I have it here on my notes. Find it. You know what? I can't even find it. Sorry, I had it prepared to put into the slide. Let me just tell it to you. The gist of the letter was that after these events, and sort of I think what Miriam was saying before, that the challenges, the arrest of the Alter Rebbe, his liberation, that all actually lent to greater legitimacy of the Hasidic movement. That's sort of the gist of what he says. And he talks about the reconciliation, and he shows how we have to go stronger, because there was a time he thought maybe after all this trouble, I shouldn't proceed. And no, the indication from on high was to pursue further, to go ahead, and to, the Hasidic movement should go only stronger and stronger. And that's certainly something that we benefit from today. And so in that point, in that letter, he references the year 1772. What happened in 1772? That's when the major opposition to the Hasidic movement really went in full force. That's the year when the communal leadership of Vilna, Alter Rebbe was Lithuanian, he was actually a Litvak, and that's when they issued a cherem, a ban, against the Hasidic movement. And they called for all Jews to stay away from these, whatever, I don't know what they called the Hasidim, they had names for them. In fact, first they called them Hasidim, and then they changed the name to Karlinim. I'm not sure if I recall exactly what that term means, but their point was, there was major opposition. Why did they issue a ban? The Alter Rebbe says that it was under a mistaken premise. It was actually a mistake. And he talks about that. And he says there was false testimony, meaning those who came to the Vilna Gaon. The Vilna Gaon never had a chance to firsthand verify these claims. Those who came to the Vilna Gaon came with claims that weren't true. Fortunately, the Vilna Gaon put into those claims and listened to them. But that's why we have to verify information. How often does it happen in our life where we just take somebody's information without verifying, without discussing it, without seeing firsthand? Yeah. So maybe they accepted that so many people were coming in to the rabbis of Vilna saying that these Hasidim are lunatics, they're crazy people. Maybe there were more than 3 people that came. When you start hearing enough times Rabbi Kievman is crazy, you start saying, okay, he's crazy. I don't want to have anything to do with him. Okay? How do you get to a place of peace? So these were lying witnesses who came along and they testified that these Hasidim, that they violated Jewish law, that they transgressed the Torah, that they did away with the traditions and the principles of faith, and even basic human decency. Did you see the letter we had on we looked at yesterday, right? They had all types of allegations. And that's why the Beis Din issued its ban on the Hasidim. But the ban was no longer in force by 1811, because as people came to know the Hasidim, they right. That's the thing, is that first of all, in those days, you didn't have the proliferation of information as easily accessible as today. So I think rumors very easily could spread and people say things. And that's what happened then. People said things, and one story spread to another, and that was part of the reason why at that stage there was no way to defend themselves properly. But I think once the Hasidic movement established itself well enough, and people became more and more familiar with it, they realized those claims weren't true. And that's what the Alter Rebbe said. Once you get to know the Hasidim, and judged him. He Chaim lived in a later period. The Chafetz Chaim is far more recent. Chafetz Chaim passed away about 85 years ago, 1930s. Yeah, mid 1930s. Yeah, I'm sure what he wrote was very relevant to, absolutely, of course. Certainly, as he was an astute person, he observed what's going on amongst the Jews in his time, and he saw the Holocaust coming, and I think that that's part of why he. So you know what? I actually have I want to have one more slide for today that I want to conclude with, and let's. The first thing we're saying is that the Alter Rebbe says is to judge favorably, that these people were misguided, but we're not going to allow, like the temple fell because of animosity and hatred. Remember the story about Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, and the sages say that amongst the sages they were wrong. Nobody stood up for a person's dignity. They could have prevented the temple's destruction, but it was, obviously it was destined. But the behavior was preventable, and that's something else. One more point that I wanted to emphasize here. Okay, so first of all, the Alter Rebbe is saying this point that even the Sanhedrin, I should have brought the letter. I'll try to bring it next time. Even the Sanhedrin could issue erroneous rulings sometimes. But here's a final point for today. Why did the Vilna Gaon oppose Chassidus? Actually, we won't do that today. We'll do that, I think, next. We'll do that on Monday, please God. So come Monday, we'll talk about why did the Vilna Gaon oppose Chassidus, why false testimony led to the ban of the Hasidic movement and the rest of the Alter Rebbe. And of course, that's going to be something fascinating to discuss, how that came about and the arrest and the reconciliation that came after the liberation. So we have a video. We'll start off Monday with a very nice video it's about 10 minutes long. That video will put things into perspective, and then we'll analyze the texts and ideas and have a very good lesson together. I'm looking forward to that. Questions? Anyone have a particular topic?